Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Again, I want to thank everybody for testifying here today. We really appreciate it. This is so upsetting, so difficult to figure out, so frustrating, as Mr. Wolf pointed out, because we talk about these things and, what do we get done? It's one of the very frustrating parts of this job as to how hard it is to actually push things over the goal line. And, it's clear everyone has a constitutional right to free speech. People can say just about anything. The president says things all the time that, aren't even accurate. But he has a constitutional right to do it. Everybody's got a constitutional right to free speech. But as was pointed out, there's no constitutional right to a tax exemption. And in fact, there were cases in the past, 1983 is the case that we see in our notes a lot, that the IRS revoked Bob Jones University's nonprofit status over its prohibition on interracial dating. And there was talk about denying tax-exempt status when it's clearly contrary to fundamental public policy, such as racial discrimination in education. But then there were some questions later on as to whether or not that law still held, whether it was too vague or not to apply that type of standard. So I can't figure this out. I don't know what the answer is. This is really complicated stuff that, Mr. Owens said it's philosophical. It's a lot of legal questions, constitutional law questions. How do you give people free speech, but you block who we would all agree, Democrats and Republicans would all agree, the bad guys? How do we stop the people who we think are the haters and the killers and the racist and the mean-spirited ones? How do we stop them from getting tax-exempt status, where they're in effect being subsidized by the people of the United States of America? How do we do it? So I don't know the answer. So one thing we heard is there needs to be more money for enforcement. Is that what you're trying to say, Mr. Owens? There needs to be more people, more money focused on enforcement. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and there needs to be more information about the organizations that are tax exempt, that are applying for exemption, and that are exempt.
So, I don't know how to say your name. Is it Volkov?
Volokh.
Volokh. Mr. Volokh, would you agree with Mr. Owens, because you both come at this from different perspectives, I think. Would you agree that there should be more money and more people working on enforcement, or do you disagree with that?
I'm not an expert in fiscal policy.
You're more of an expert than anybody else on this topic. Do you think there should be more money for enforcement on enforcement?
I would be skeptical about that, and part of the
You don't trust them to do enforcement at the IRS?
Partly, but what's going to happen is if this happens, then people from 501c3 groups, perfectly legitimate 501c3 groups, in your districts are going to be calling you and saying,
Okay, so you're saying it just can't be done. Nobody can enforce this. You said it's impossible to enforce, so we shouldn't enforce it at all?
I said that it's kind of enforcement that is rife with opportunity for abuse. But even if it is done,
if I agree with you that there's rife with opportunity for abuse, I agree with you that some human beings will manipulate the system. It's happened in the past. You talked about Martin Luther King before, and there are other cases more recently. I agree with you. But do you think there should be more money for enforcement to do that, assuming that it could be done properly? Would you agree with that or not?
I would not. More money.
Okay, so you don't want any more money for enforcement. So this can't be enforced in any way, you're saying?
Well, if it's enforced, it'll be enforced. If it's enforced even-handedly, 95% of the enforcement.
Okay, but to enforce it even-handedly, you need more money and more people to do it. So do you think we should have more money and more people to do it, assuming they would do it even-handedly?
What will end up happening is it will end up burdening all sorts.
So you're saying it's impossible to do then?
It's possible. It would be expensive and it would be rife with risk of abuse. But it's certainly possible.
So if we had more money, we could do a better job enforcing this.
Then you would do a better job enforcing it. And you'd also put lots of extra burdens on perfectly proper 501c3s who are going to have to go through all of these extra bureaucratic.
We've got a big problem in our country. We've got a lot of hate groups out there that now have tax exemption and nobody's enforcing it. Okay, so the second question is, Mr. Owens, this is so complicated. Is there a standard that the IRS can apply to go? We read all different types of reports. There's 60 groups that have been identified by the philanthropy organizations as being hate groups. Is there a standard that could be applied to look at those folks and to stop them from getting tax exemption? If you had control and you were the president or the emperor, what would be the way to do it?
The way to do it would be to require organizations to describe what they do in furtherance of their tax-exempt purposes, to do that in writing, to do that in an electronic format so it can be quickly and efficiently reviewed, and a staff to review it, and then a staff to take action if it suggests there's inappropriate activity going on.
And it would have to be even-handed, as has been pointed out earlier.
That is correct, and it has to be based on activities, not just what one person happened to say one day.
Okay. Thank you very much. My time has expired. Mr. Chairman, you weren't here earlier. I just want to thank you again for your leadership on so many different issues, including this issue. This is so hard because we open ourselves up to, like, what are you going to get done, as Mr. Wolf was pointing out. It's very frustrating to even talk about this stuff, but you've got tremendous courage, and you're a great model for all of us. So thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you for your question.